So you will recall on Wednesday last, in your introduction to Ketuvim, or the sacred writings, the third of the three parts of the Hebrew Bible, you heard a very nice discussion from Eric about wisdom literature as a genre, and specifically orthodox or positive or standard wisdom literature, right, which sees the world in terms of good, bad, except that the divine does not play an active role in the wisdom conception of the world. Rather, the life of virtue, the reward of a life of virtue is a life of virtue. The reward of leading a good life is you've led a good life. And similarly, the punishment for a life not of wisdom is that you're leading a life of folly, which is punishment in and of itself. This is the fundamental conception of wisdom, and you heard about that from Eric. We see that perspective enshrined in primarily the book of Proverbs and also in a bunch of different Psalms. So in Psalms, you already begin to see the integration of piety, fear of the Lord, and wisdom notions. Okay, that's from Eric. Today we're looking at Kohelet and Job. Kohelet and Job are sometimes called speculative wisdom or negative wisdom. Kohelet is another name for Ecclesiastes, which is the Greek name for the book. Kohelet is the Hebrew name for the book. Nobody knows exactly what these names mean, so it just makes just as much sense to call it Kohelet as to call it Ecclesiastes. So today we're looking at Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, and the book of Job, which are the two main biblical exemplars of negative wisdom, i.e., where someone looks at wisdom notions and rejects them or questions them. Kohelet and Job are part and parcel of wisdom lit and have many characteristics in common with wisdom lit, which we see elsewhere in the Bible. Most importantly, for our purposes, it's international or cosmopolitan. The book of Job was written in Hebrew. The book of Job was written by an Israelite author, obviously. But the author chose to have the book revolve around the sufferings, the sayings, the doings, the comings and goings of non-Israelite characters, beginning with Job himself, who is not depicted as an Israelite. Ish haya be'eretz Utz. He lives in the land of Utz. Where Utz is, I don't know exactly. I have to go check my Google Maps, right? But it's somewhere, I know one thing. Utz is not found in the land of Israel. It's somewhere else, right? And similarly, his three friends, who each of them gets a mysterious kind of name with an adjectival appellation, they're not Israelites. So the author is deliberately taking a very profoundly Israelite theme and topic, but is deliberately writing it ascribing it to non-Israelite characters, removing it from Israelite specificity. Consequently, there are no references here or generally in wisdom literature to Israelite history, Israelite culture, Israelite practices. They don't mention the name of Moses. They don't mention the name of Jacob, right? These things which we are accustomed to in the prophets, for example, right? We don't find in wisdom literature in general, or for that matter, in Ecclesiastes or the book of Job. When Job is busy protesting his innocence and explaining, hey, I've been a good guy, why am I suffering so? He has a very wonderful chapter, which I should have asked you to read, Job chapter 31, where he lays out his credentials. Look, I've done X, Y, and Z. I've given money to United Way and the Boy Scouts. I've helped old ladies across the street. I've given money to charity. I've just generally looked out for the welfare of the poor and downtrodden. Those are the virtues that he highlights in Job 31. He doesn't say, I made sure to go on pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. He doesn't say, I ate only kosher food. He doesn't say, I observed the Sabbath. Right? Israelite-specific piety is not what Job is about. Job is about, we may call, generic virtue. He's a good man. That's how the author depicts him. This, again, is a wisdom conception. It's international. Literature is also upper class. I don't know if Eric spoke about this, but wisdom literature is overwhelmingly written by and for people with money. You can see that in the book of Job, who is described in the beginning of the book as very wealthy, and at the end, after all his suffering and torment, he gets everything back. And he's still wealthy. He is twice as wealthy as before. Same number of daughters, though. Everything else doubles, but same number of daughters. Otherwise, he's twice as wealthy as before. So The orientation of the book, the setting of the book, is wealth. And one of the themes in Kohelet is how life is unfair. Somebody works very hard for the money and is pious and virtuous and makes a lot of money, and then his money goes to his kid, who's a no-good. Is that fair? No, of course that's not fair. That's one of the complaints that Kohelet has. It's not fair. But this is the complaints of somebody with money, or somebody who moves in those circles and thinks that it's highly unfair. So the literature is written overwhelmingly by and for people with money. That is certainly true in Kohelet in the case of Job. And just in case you aren't sure of Job as a wisdom book, he has a whole chapter about wisdom, capital W, Job 28. Well, we'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. So, Kohelet and Job belong to wisdom literature. They're part of the literature with these themes and settings that we call wisdom literature. But Job and Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, are written primarily to reject wisdom teachings or to question wisdom teachings. That's why we call it negative or speculative wisdom. There are analogs to these books in the ancient Near East, but nothing in the end of the day that's quite like Kohelet or quite like Job, as far as I could tell. You have other works out there which, complaints. You have good parallels to Psalms of Lament. Remember, we spoke about that also on Wednesday last, where somebody says, God, why these things terribly happen to me? Why don't you come and help me? Right, those are Psalms of Lament. So that could be either singular, God, I'm suffering, or plural, oh God, we're suffering. Right, those are, right. So there are very good analogs to that in the ancient Near East, which are vaguely similar to Job's complaints, but Job, the rhetoric is different and the setting is different. I don't know of anything quite exactly like Job or Ecclesiastes, so this is something which grows out of Israelite piety or Israelite reflection on the world. So what is bothering these two authors? In a word, Kohelet is about death, and Job is about suffering. Each of these 2 points, death and suffering, causes the author to question the traditionally received wisdom teachings. So I'll talk briefly about Kohelet. I know it wasn't assigned, but it's brief and you can get a handle on it very quickly. And then we'll talk about the book of Job, which is the main item for today. Book of Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes, traditionally assigned to Solomon. You will recall that Solomon looms large in the wisdom literature tradition, right? Solomon is allegedly the author also of the book of the book of Proverbs. David, his father, is allegedly the author of the book of Psalms, right? Solomon, is the author of the book of Proverbs. He also is the author traditionally of the book of the Song of Songs, which is something I can't deal with here. It's such a complicated book in itself, but it's a great book for a little report, for those of you who did that on your first paper. Anyway, Solomon was remembered as wise. That's in the story of Kings. You recall the story of cut the baby in half. The Queen of Sheba comes to quiz Solomon on his wisdom. Solomon asks God for wisdom in that vision that he gets in Gibeon, right at the beginning of his monarchy. So Solomon is remembered as particularly wise, and consequently tradition ascribes to him books of wisdom, most obviously Proverbs, parts of which are explicitly attributed to Solomon, and then Kohelet. Even though it doesn't call the author Solomon, it says the words of Kohelet, son of David. But Kohelet's not a real name, it's a fake name. So is that Solomon? Well, traditionally that's Solomon. Modern scholars, to a person, agree, we don't know who wrote the book, but we know one thing. It was not written by Solomon. Right? Because had Solomon written the book of Ecclesiastes, it would have sounded different and looked different. Right? The Hebrew is the wrong kind of Hebrew for Solomon. Of this, we all agree, we modern Bible scholars. Who then wrote the book of Ecclesiastes? Of course, that we don't know. The author is deliberately hiding his identity, and it looks like to be a late book. What does late mean? Well, guesses range all over the place. Persian period, we all remember that period, right? Persian period. Some argue even the Hellenistic period, down to the 4th or even 3rd century BCE. But at the end of the day, we don't know. At the end of the day, I don't really care. So, what are the themes of the book of Ecclesiastes, no matter when it was written or by whom? Leaving aside those insoluble problems, what is the book saying? All is vanity is the opening line, and it sort of serves as a refrain throughout the book. All right, Havel Havalim Amar Kohelet Hakol Havel. Everything is vanity, vapor, futility. No apparent plan or purpose. What's the point? Why do you work so hard? Just work hard to get money. But you know what's going to happen? You know what's going to happen? You're going to die. You're going to die whether you're righteous. You're going to die whether you're wicked. You're going to die whether you're lazy. You're going to die whether you're industrious. You're going to die whether you're virtuous. You're going to die whether you're not virtuous. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a cow or a human being. You're going to die. I believe I've summarized accurately the 12 chapters of the book of Ecclesiastes, which, in my opinion, badly need an editor. But that's just my personal opinion. So these are the point he comes back to over and over again. Modern scholars call Kohelet pessimistic, is a common term used in reference to this book. I, Shaye, Cohen, don't see the book as pessimistic. I see the book as kind of realistic. We are all going to die. I mean, that's just, that's not pessimism. That's just a sad fact, right? We all have an allotted time. We don't know how long, but that's it, right? That's the nature of life. The nature of life includes death. So Kohelet is obsessed with this point, however. And at the end of the day, not clear what advice he's giving you, except there are a number of different contradictory verses in the book. Go out and make whoopee, have parties, have fun, because it's all finite amount of time available to you. Or the other approach would be to say, of course, is be straight, honest, true, and live a good life, and that's the best you can hope for in this miserable existence. Right. So Ecclesiastes has all verses. You could trot out any verse that you want and cite that as the point of the book. The amazing thing about Kohelet is that it's in the Hebrew Bible. At least to my mind, that's the amazing thing. Job is not so amazing to find in the Hebrew Bible, but I think it's amazing that Kohelet's in the Hebrew Bible. We hear as someone who fundamentally is arguing that there is no point to it all, and someone who looks at life and says, what's it all about? It's all meaningless, and ultimately, because we're all going to die. And somehow that book, with all of its pessimism, if that's the right word, although I don't think so, or its realism, or its negativity, that for sure we could say, did find its way into the Hebrew Bible. And not only that, but is regularly read in synagogue on one holiday during the year. It's part of the Jewish liturgical cycle, and that's why it's part of the 5 scrolls, which you heard about on Wednesday. So that, to my mind, is the most amazing thing. Not that the book exists, but that the book was preserved, venerated, and ultimately even attributed to Solomon himself. Yes, Mark. Good. So the traditions ascribe it to Solomon simply because of the opening phrase. Devrei Kohelet ben David melech b'Yerushalayim, Havel Havalim Mar Kohelet Havalim HaKol Havel. That's how the book begins. So the words of Kohelet, son of David, and it's also, later on, there's a verse in there which he refers to, I was king in Jerusalem. It says, Iti melech b'Yerushalayim, he has a phrase. I was a king in Jerusalem. King there probably means a great man, a wealthy man. That's probably what it means. But if you're a literalist, so they took these as clues that the man is a king. Now, why does the wise King Solomon write a book such as this? So the rabbis come up with a beautiful metaphor, right? When Solomon was young and full of creative energies, he wrote the Song of Songs, which is all about love and procreation and such. And then in middle age, he wrote the book of Proverbs, full of the wisdom of a man of experience. And when he gets to be a grumpy old man, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, which on one hand is not a historical statement. On the other hand, they're showing that they realize that these books are not the same. These books have different flavor, a different culture to them. And the book of Ecclesiastes is written by a grumpy old man who it's all over and doesn't have much to show for it. But you're right. That's not what I would have associated with King Solomon. Okay, now we get to the main course, right? We get to the main thing, which is the book of Job. Like Kohelet, the point of the book of Job is ambiguous, as I'll discuss in one moment. The date and setting of the book of Job are completely up in the air, as is true for the book of Ecclesiastes. We only know this. Whoever wrote the book of Job was an Israelite thinker, obviously, but was also an Israelite poet of tremendous versatility and depth. So much so that the book of Job, one can say without fear of contradiction, is by far the most difficult book in the Hebrew Bible, simply to translate the words, just to construe, make sense out of the Hebrew words. We won't get asked now about the point what the book means, just translate it. Right? It is by far and away the most difficult, the most challenging book. So the book of Job is by far the most difficult poetry in the Hebrew Bible. So this is written by a master poet, and people have tried to figure out why is the book so difficult? Why does the book contain numerous hapax legomena, strange words that appear only once in the Bible, strange verbal forms, passages where the grammar doesn't seem to work? I don't know what's going on. Anyway, this we all agree. Now, how you date that is very difficult. So some people have argued it's written by a dialect different from the usual dialect of Hebrew. That's why it's so difficult. Anyway, so dating of this book is also, as a result, is completely up in the air. It's anonymous, so you pick a date. Right. Welcome to the world of modern Bible scholarship. Okay. So I'm not going to worry about that again, as the case with Ecclesiastes. I can't worry about it because I don't know what to do. But anyway, more important for our purposes, of course, is what does the book mean, rather than to obsess about its date or its original setting, which we'll do in just a moment. There is the narrative frame of the book. The narrative frame is what's often been called a folk tale, or a prior existing folk tale. It's a folk tale because of the ending. So the narrative frame presumably gives us the phrase patience of Job, which is a phrase that's well known, and it comes out of the New Testament from the letter of James. I give you the reference on the handout. So what is the frame? The frame is the frame story, first two chapters and last chapter. It goes like this. There once was a man named Job, who was a very pious and righteous man and very, very wealthy. And then, for reasons that are not clear, it depends how you spin things in the narrative frame, I'll get back to Satan in a minute, right? The Lord tested him. The Lord tested him by bringing disaster upon disaster upon disaster. But Job endured. Job did not crack. Job's faith was untarnished, unvarnished, unblemished. He remained faithful. And as a result, in the end, the Lord gave him everything back, only more so. So he got all his flocks back. He got all of his sons back, twice as many as before. He got his daughters back. Actually, not the same kids. He got another group of kids. I'll come back to the problem with the kids. The kids are a big problem. Right. So he got back another set of kids, except that this bunch, these are much better kids. Right. They all did their homework, and all the women are beautiful and everything. Right. Much, much better. Right. Than the first group of kids. Right. And he got all of his flocks back. And there you see Job's patience is rewarded. His endurance, which is what patience might mean, his endurance is rewarded. He held firm. He was faithful. He was a rock in the storm. That's the original narrative story. And you can see it very clearly in chapter 1 and 2, which almost seamlessly jumps now to the end, to chapter 42, and you discover it's an almost seamless narrative. Some master poet, the author of Job, took this narrative frame and then split it open and then inserted into the middle a cycle of extraordinarily dense, as I mentioned, poetic chapters from each of various characters. Job himself, beginning in chapter 3, Job's lament, Yovad Yomi Valadbo, Laila Mar Hora Gaver, right? May the day be cursed on which I was born, right? I wish I had never been born, Job says in chapter 3, right? Job's lament. And then his three friends, or dubious friends perhaps, right, show up to comfort him. So here he's sitting on the ash heap, right, covered with boils, now penniless, and deprived of his children who have all been killed, right? And his wife says to him, "Curse the Lord and die." Right. So all the commentators try to understand what kind of wife is this. Right. But so the wife says to him, "Curse the Lord and die." Right. And Job has lamented, and his 3 friends come to comfort him. And then the poet gives them, each one in turn gets a chapter. So friend number 1 gets a chapter, Job responds. Friend number 2, Job responds. Friend number 3, Job responds. Then we go over again. Friend number 1, Job responds. Friend number 2, Job responds. Friend number 3, Job responds. Then the third time around, the author is getting tired, or the text is getting corrupted. When we don't have a whole cycle of 3, we have fragments of a cycle. And then the whole structure collapses, and there's something weird going on. Then all of a sudden we discover there's a new fellow who walks in, right? There's Elihu who comes in. And then all of a sudden the Lord himself makes an appearance. And then we go back to the frame narrative, and the book stops. So all of us can see that this book has undergone growth. Right, that somebody keeps sticking chapters into this book, and also deletion. Some chapters have fallen out. That last cycle of friends and Job talking is incomplete. So the book, as we have it, it's not clear whether we have the finished final product as intended by the author of the book of Job, or whether we have something bigger or something shorter than that original poem written by the author of the book of Job. And that very much comes to the problem of what is the book trying to say. Do we see the book as complete or not? Might help us figure out what is the message of the book. To which I now turn. What is the message of the book? Well, it's very clear what the book is about. Ecclesiastes, as I mentioned, is about death. Job is about suffering. The suffering of the righteous. Why do the righteous suffer? So here, I'll give you how Shaye Cohen understands this book, but everybody who's ever read this book has argued about what exactly is the point of the book. So I will explain to you how at least I understand this book, and feel free to disagree. I don't have any inside information. I'm just giving you how I understand it. And I'm willing to say up front, the book gives different answers, and these answers are inconsistent with each other. That's part of the beauty of the book. So what's the first? Let's go back and talk about the first response, I think, of the book, suffering as a test. That's the original folk story, right? Job is tested. Job endures. Job remains firm. That's the patience of Job. But in the framework as we have it, there is something else going on. Why does God test Job? Answer, because God makes a bet. He makes a bet with Satan. I'll come back to Satan in a moment. Satan says to God, "Hey, you know, God, I know why Job is so pious and such a virtuous man, because you've made it easy for him. Look, he's got flocks and sons and wealth and respectability, so of course he likes you. Who wouldn't worship the Lord if everything's going well? Why don't you turn things around a little bit and we'll see what happens?" Satan says to the Lord. And God says, "I can't do that. He's a righteous man." No, that's not what God says. God says, "Okay, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. Let's turn up the heat and see what happens." So first the flocks get killed, right? And then Satan says, "How about a little more?" And God says, "Okay, a little more. All right, so we'll kill his sons. Okay, a little more." Job still doesn't crack. We'll turn the heat up a little more, turn the pressure up a little more. So God says, "Okay, you can attack his body now. All right, now he gets boils and blisters from head to toe, right? Or whatever. So it turns out that in the narrative frame, why does Job suffer? The answer is because God has a bet with Satan. Now, I would respectfully suggest that this is a horrible answer to contemplate. This means that suffering has absolutely no meaning whatsoever. Not only is it not deserved, it has no meaning. It has no function. The function of Job's suffering is simply to see who's going to win. He has to pay for the next beer. Is it God or is it Satan? It has no meaning. Now, the interesting point here is that nowhere in the rest of the book do we hear from or about Satan again, or the bet. It disappears. It has no follow-through in the book, perhaps because the theological implications are so troubling that the author who put them in the beginning, perhaps part of that original folktale, or I don't know where it's coming from exactly, that does not carry forward into the body of the book. And I would suggest why. The why is because it's a horrible thing to contemplate, that we human beings are just playthings who are suffering because God feels like it. Or worse, God is put up to it by a bet with Satan. Now, who is this mysterious Satan fellow? Let's talk about that. I gave you on your assignment sheet, on the syllabus, a bunch of passages. Oh, didn't update the syllabus yet, but it's on the assignment sheet for today. I'll update the syllabus soon. Some passages from the Hebrew Bible where this root, STN in English transcription, right, appears, either as a proper noun or either as a noun or as a verb. It's not a proper noun. It's either a noun or a verb. So in brief, you look at the passages that I gave you. Satan is not yet that figure of fame and fortune, right, who looms so large, for example, in Paradise Lost of Milton. Right? No, we're not there yet. Satan here is simply an accuser, a prosecuting attorney. He is very much a member of the divine court. That's how he's depicted right there in Job chapter 1. Right? The members of the divine council, the divine court, they're getting together for a meeting. God has called a meeting, and all of his ministers are showing up, including Satan. So Satan is not, repeat, not an oppositional figure. He is not the figure of cosmic dualism, right? He is not the force, the countervailing force to God. He's not the bad guy opposed to God who's the good guy. He's not the force of evil against the force of good. No, we're not there yet. He is very much part and parcel of God's running of the world. He's part of the divine council. But his job is to be the prosecuting attorney. His job is always to think of something negative to say. We all know people like that. Right, so that's Satan. And Satan is not yet his name. It is, in Hebrew, in Job, it is Ha-Satan. It comes with a definite article in front of his name. I mean, so it's not a name. It's a description. The adversary, the troubler, the troublemaker. Something like that would be the way to translate it. And if you translate adversary, lowercase a, not capital A. In time, Satan, either by the name Satan or other names, I give you a bunch in the handout, Bliar or Mastema or the dragon or the beast, Satan will go on to fame and fortune as an independent character, all right, as a character who leads the forces of darkness against the forces of light, who leads the forces of evil against the forces of goodness. We very much have a cosmic dualistic view of the world. Yeah, that's this guy. He will go on to that. But he's not there yet in the book of Job. Satan has not yet developed into what he will ultimately become. We see that in the various apocalyptic books of the late Second Temple period. We'll come back to apocalyptic stuff on Wednesday, in some kind of Judaism, and especially in Christianity, where the devil looms large, at least in most forms of Christianity I'm familiar with. So that's Satan fellow. So our first answer so far is that Job is suffering because God and Satan have a bet. Can Job take it or not? This is an interesting point too. As far as I could see, and I can't swear that I understand everything going on in the book of Job, far from it, but everybody seems to agree in the book of Job, certainly Job and his friends agree, that ultimately God is responsible for Job's suffering. Why is the question? But that the source of the suffering is God seems to be agreed by all. The only question is why. Now that's an interesting point, because in wisdom literature generally, we don't attribute reward and punishment to God. We don't have a Deuteronomistic view where God rewards the righteous, punishes the wicked in a very, very definite closed system. Rather, wisdom literature doesn't work that way. And yet here in this book, and this is one reason why I call it an anti-wisdom book, right? We are in fact emphasizing that the Job suffering does come from God. What we want to understand is why. And ultimately, I think in this book, which is anti-wisdom, in its chapter about wisdom, chapter 28, it ultimately says that fear of the Lord is wisdom, and only God truly understands wisdom. So we have divine reward and punishment in this book, even though wisdom literature, as a rule, shuns this motif or eschews this motif. I'll come back to that. So, first response. Why does Job suffer? Answer: God and Satan had an arm wrestling bet, and we're going to see whether Job can take it or not. And as I said before, that motif nowhere appears anywhere else in the book, because I think everybody realizes that is such a horrible idea to contemplate, take seriously as a theological explanation, that we don't want to go there. Okay, on to my second answer. That's the first implied answer. How Job is a non-Israelite but worships the God of Israel. He worships the God of Israel because the God of Israel is the supreme deity. So, as we've seen in the prophets all the time, right, God of Israel has a universal moral order, and everyone is expected to obey it, including Gentile kings, Gentile nations. If they don't observe the moral order established by God, they get punished by God. That's a very clear motif. We've already seen that. So Job worships God that way. He doesn't observe the Sabbath. He doesn't eat matzah on Passover, right? He doesn't do Israelite-specific rituals or practices, but he honors his father and mother, gives charity to the poor, and generally has universal virtues. Oh, but he very much is a supernatural party, because he's part of the divine council, along with the other B'nai Elohim, is what it says. Literally, sons of God. The same phrase you have in Genesis 6, where you have the miscegenation of the sons of God with the daughters of men. That's the same phrase. So there is a kind of divine council, angels, you want to call them, perhaps. It doesn't use that word here, but maybe something like that. So Satan seems to be one of them. Whatever you think they are, he is too. So they're definitely not human, right? It's something else. Okay, let's go on to our second explanation. The argument of the three friends, or should I say, friends. I mean, these are not the kind of friends you want. Right. So they keep on repeating over and over again. As far as I can see, there's no real intellectual development of the answer. The answer is simply restated in numerous different poetic ways. The answer is, Job, if you're suffering like this, you must have done something. I mean, let's get serious, Job. Right? You can't be suffering to such a terrible extent. Surely somewhere you must have done something. Now let's figure out what it was. And Job says in reply, no, I deny it. I did nothing to justify suffering such as this. So, in effect, the three friends are upholding what we might call traditional wisdom or orthodox wisdom. If you're suffering like this, it's a function of it's your own fault. Because if you were leading a virtuous life, you would have a good life. Everybody knows that's how it works. If you're having a terrible life, you must have done something terrible. Now, okay, so here are two interesting points. First is that the friends, in effect, are endorsing traditional old-time religious values. And in the end, we're told that they're wrong. Right? God out of the whirlwind, at the end of the book, comes and says explicitly, you, three guys, you go ask Job for forgiveness because of all the terrible things that you said. And Job will intercede and pray for you, so I won't punish you. What? All we did, God, was take the stuff out of Hebrew school. I mean, this is what you taught us in Hebrew school, right? Or Sunday Bible school, right? If your virtue is rewarded, then sin is punished. He's being punished. We assume he is a sin. What are you yelling at us for? No, you ask Job to intercede for you, lest I come and punish you. So the narrator, on the one hand, gives a lot of time and attention to this position, but seems pretty clearly in the end of the day to say this explanation is inadequate. So much so that if you attribute sin to somebody who is suffering, you in effect are sinning yourself because you are suspecting a righteous man, and Job is a righteous man. I come back to this problem about the death of the children, which bothers us moderns no end. Bothers me no end. Right. So Job, to be punished, his children get killed. Right. The house collapses and they're at a party and the children get killed. Now I understand how this is a punishment for Job. I mean, as a parent, I understand completely how this is a horrible punishment. I understand that. On the other hand, what are these kids getting killed for? Nobody in the book worries about that. The kids are simply being punished as a way of punishing the parent. So it's the classic example of visiting the sins of the parent on the children in order to visit the parent. And the author at no point stops to think for a second, gee, maybe the death of the children is a problem in itself. And it's not as if he gets the same kids back later in the end who are miraculously resurrected. No, he gets another bunch of kids. So this is something which bothers me, and I assume bothers most of us modern types, where the author's view of things is very different from our own, where we, of course, look at the children as individuals in their own right, and he, the author, simply sees them as extensions of Job himself, and their loss is another way of punishing Job, just like the loss of his cattle. Okay, Job as intercessor, a very fascinating verse in Ezekiel. Go look it up. Okay, third answer. So we got two answers so far, right? The horrible bet answer, which is a terrible answer. Traditional piety, which the book itself says explicitly is inadequate to explain it. Then we get to Job answer number 3, which I think is the real answer of the book. And the answer is, there is no answer. The answer is ultimately, I can't explain it. And this, I think, is the point of those two speeches of the Lord out of the whirlwind, or out of the tempest, out of the storm, min ha-se'ara, right? That the Lord shows up. And how do you know it's God? Because, again, it's some, whirlwind. Some special effects department came up with, this whirlwind thing, like we have in the book of Exodus. We have pillar of fire, pillar of smoke. So here we got a tempest, a storm. So that's how we know it's God. And he gives two speeches to Job, 38 and 39, and then 40 and 41. The theme of these speeches is God is the all-powerful creator. And Job, who the hell do you think you are to come and start complaining to me when I have the whole world to worry about? And you are just a measly worm. Well, he doesn't say that exactly, but that's more or less what it means, at least I think. And in response to that, in chapter 42, it's a wonderful line where Job concedes that, in fact, he understands nothing. And I see that as part and parcel of that hymn to wisdom in Job 28, where Job himself extols wisdom and ultimately in the end says, who can find wisdom? No one can find wisdom, only God can. Because wisdom is ultimately unknowable by us humans. It's ultimately unreachable. Only God can get it, because you and I cannot. We can dig up gold and silver, but we can't dig up wisdom. So here, the book, again, if I see this correctly, it's an anti-wisdom book. It's a book, ultimately, which says wisdom, human rationality, human thought, is inadequate to understand this mystery of mysteries, Job's suffering. And if I understand the book correctly, Job acknowledges this in the end. Job understands this. And Job says, it's a mystery. And God says, well then, shut up. There is a fourth answer, which is the answer implied by the happy ending. Again, this folkloristic happy ending of the book. Right? We don't want Job just to walk away, covered with boils, poor, homeless. No, we don't want that to happen. So the book has the folkloristic ending, where he gets his money back, his flocks back, he gets a new set of sons, a new set of daughters, twice as many sons, same number of daughters, right? And he lives to a happy old age, happy, wealthy, and wise. And that's where the book ends. So it has a happy ending. So the folkloristic part I understand. He gets the money back, and he gets the same kids. He gets a different set of kids. I keep bothering by that problem. Right? He gets kids back. Later readers, Jewish and Christian alike, will see in this happy ending, right, a clue to a happy ending of a different kind, which is unknown to the author of the book. A later reader might have said, well, don't worry, Job. Your sufferings are in this world. And this world is but temporary. This world is here today, gone tomorrow. This world is nothing. The real existence is the next world. And your suffering in this world means that your reward in the next world will be redoubled all the more as compensation for the horrible sufferings you've had to endure. This will be the kind of theology that later Jews and Christians, both, each alike, will advance and will say, there is a reward in the hereafter. There is a Garden of Eden. There is some heaven as opposed to hell. Right? There is some light. There is a resurrection of the righteous. There are some series of things that will reward you in the hereafter for all the rewards that you did not receive in the here and now. This will turn out to be theology of Judaism and Christianity. Job, the book of Job, however, was written by someone who does not yet know this. So the only way he can have a happy ending is not to put Job in the afterlife, not to put Job in the Garden of Eden. The only way he can have a happy ending is for Job to get flocks back, Job to get sons back, to get his houses back, to get his riches back, to get his health back. Then Job is rewarded. Then we have a happy ending. You can see the same thing in Kohelet also, where Kohelet too explicitly denies ideas of punishment or reward in the hereafter. So these ideas were floating around in various places, but have not yet achieved canonical form, and will not do so for several centuries later. Again, the chronology is a little vague, right? But Job is still working with the idea that if you're going to get rewarded, you have to get rewarded in this world, because after you're dead, there is nothing, or there's some vague, shadowy existence, but not one that will give you reward and punishment. So ultimately, the fourth explanation is the one which the book does not offer, but the one that later readers will see in the book, namely the happy ending of Job is a statement about the reward and punishment, reward awaiting him for his suffering in the hereafter. So to conclude, if I understand the book of Job correctly, Job is a wisdom book, but it's also an anti-wisdom book. Right? Job is a wisdom book, as we discussed, part of the genre. It's speculative wisdom, it's critical wisdom, it's skeptical wisdom, right? But Job is also an anti-wisdom book, in which the argument is that wisdom, in fact, has limits. That human rationality, human thought, is incapable on its own of understanding or grasping these fundamental, large religious questions, notably the suffering of the righteous, which ultimately is inexplicable and ultimately is not understandable by us humans left to our own devices. And that's the point of the chapter of the Lord himself explaining this to Job, and Job acknowledging his own limits, our own human limits. This at least is how Shaye Cohen understands what the book of Job is about and how the thing hangs together. but I freely acknowledge that the book is extremely rich, not to mention untranslatable, and consequently you, I, other readers may disagree on how exactly to parse the book. And I refer you to that radio discussion show a few weeks ago, which is a link to which is on your handout, which I think discusses some of these issues, I think, very intelligently and very well. Okay, that's all I'm going to say on the book of Job. Do you have questions? Well, the key point, ultimately wisdom does get combined with traditional piety, right? The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord, right? You have that right there in the beginning in Proverbs, right? So you already have a combination of the two, Israelite piety and wisdom literature, right? Wisdom is too radical all by itself, right? People understood it needs to be integrated into standard Israelite piety, which is what happens. Where does wisdom come from that it is originally so independent? I mean, or is that true? I don't really know, except to say that you have wisdom teachers, and the only way you can have an international genre is everybody more or less agrees not to talk about their own specificities. So the Israelites don't do theirs, and the Egyptians don't do theirs, and the Greeks don't do theirs, right? Then you have an international genre. I don't know exactly where it comes from beyond that. You can see in the book of Samuel, right, David's advisor is Achitophel, who also is not an Israelite character. He's also said to be wise. The wisest of all the men is Achitophel, who is not Israelite either. Again, there is some sense here that there is wisdom to be found among non-Israelite nations. Okay. Right, we Israelites don't have the monopoly on wisdom. Okay. And there is that's an interesting point. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. We'll see you guys Wednesday.